Hi everybody, thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This is Eve West. This channel is dedicated to promoting a book that I wrote. It's called Follow. My book is based upon a holistic view of spirituality, looking at spirituality not just from a psychological standpoint, but also from an earthly aspect as well. As I always open, most of my videos, we think of spirituality as something, purely metaphysical. We think of spirituality as, kindness and love and caring and sharing and all those different feeling aspects of a human being. But spirituality is not just about the feelings, it's also about, your earthly aspect as well, your reptilian brain, which you can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. And so when you're denying those aspects of yourself, you're not living life in integrity. You're living life in a very unholy way. And so when we descend into earth reality, which has now devolved into hell, into a satanic, state of mind, if you will, we're really, just interacting with aspects of ourselves in a very disintegrated way. And we're not honoring others as ourselves. So, my book aims to actually integrate the earthly as well as the psychological aspect into promote holiness or wholeness, if you will. This particular chapter is called Penny. This chapter is called Penny. And Penny is, the reason why I called this chapter Penny is because, when we think about wholeness, we think about one or oneness. Like in the New Age, you'll hear a lot of New Age gurus talk about the oneness of the universe, if you will. And so, I talk in my book about being a victim of satanic ritual abuse and having a handler. And my handler would oftentimes, taunt me with pennies. Because although I was always encouraged to seek wholeness and integration, I was always faced with an environment that facilitated, the opposite of that, and disintegration. And so my handler created scenarios that facilitated the opposite of what I was instructed to do. And so this created a lot of suffering on my part. But Penny represents oneness. And so in this particular chapter, I focus on the opposite of really the dissociative aspect of a human being. You could say a human being, when you descend into the hell realm, you have dissociative disorder. Like for me, when I was younger, I was sexually abused, and so that purposely made me dissociate from my body. And I just started living life purely from my psychological mind. So you could say that this naturally gave me, I guess, what you would call so-called psychic or empathic abilities, where I could, experience people as myself, instead of having a necessary boundary that the sacral energy gives you. Your sacral energy allows you to not only just experience integration, but also have that balance of disintegration, so you can function as an ego within your reality, and you can just kind of grant your wishes and ground your wishes in your own desires, in addition to appreciating the element of life around you as yourself. And so when you don't have that sacral part of you, you take on the sins of the world, basically. It's like you're a Jesus figure, you're an empath, you take on the sins of the world. And so, when you think about the pineal gland, which is the part of your brain that gives you insight, right? That allows you to see into different dimensions. You're not just governed by your five senses, but you have insight. So when you are, when you think about the pineal gland, you think about the planet Saturn, the planet of consciousness, which is Saturn. And that is what the pineal gland is governed by. It's governed by the material. So when you think about the celestial body of Saturn, it's the only planet that has like a shape like a dome or a ball or whatever, but it has rings around it. And so basically, the planet Saturn is not in balance. The satanic, or the Saturnic, I call it. I'm not sure if that's a word, but the Saturn aspect of the consciousness devolves into Satan. But within balance, Saturn is supposed to have the ring. And so the ring represents the masculine aspect of the planet. And so when you think about the creators of our reality, you think about Freemasons, their whole symbol is the protractor. So if you use the protractor, when I was in middle school, we used to use the protractor. I guess they have more sophisticated technology. Architects, have sophisticated technology and computers that, have made the protractor obsolete. But when we used to use a protractor in school, it creates a circle. And so the circle is just one aspect of the planet Saturn, but it is the rings that actually allows the planet to sustain its energy. And so without a ring, which represents the masculine aspect of a soul, the sacral earthly aspect, without a ring, the feminine bleeds out the energy, and so the sun dies. And so you keep dying lifetime after lifetime until you integrate with your masculine counterpart. And so whenever you don't have that ring and you don't have marriage or holy matrimony with your masculine side to yourself, then your energy just kind of bleeds out. And when you study occult information, it talks about how the mind and the body is not something that you should really be forced out of. Typically, we're forced out of the mind and body at death, but really, you're supposed to give up the mind and body at will. This is not a planet where, this is supposed to be about enjoyment, and this whole realm is supposed to be about pleasure. It's not supposed to be about anything serious. So when you're forced out of something, that means that there's an imbalance. And even when you look at certain occult, like doctrine, like the Emerald Tablets and stuff like that, you see in the Emerald Tablets, it talks about how if you balance the North and the South Pole, then, the soul will not taste death, and so you gain immortality. But the whole focus of the demiurge is to actually create imbalance so you can keep coming, and reincarnating lifetime to lifetime until you have no awareness left. So I focus on, how we're supposed to, in Penny, in this chapter, we're supposed to embrace our oneness and integrate and be whole. And so, we can think of the feminine energy of a human being as being the sun. Everything in all the celestial bodies represent an aspect of a human being. The universe is not outside of us. The universe is within us. It represents energy systems or chakras within us. And so you can think of the feminine aspect, like in this case, I play the feminine counterpart, as a sun. So, I'm the psychological, spiritual one. I'm the truth, you can say. So, but there's another aspect to me, which is I talk about as the astral self, and your astral self is who you go to sleep to at night. You give up all your concepts of the matrix, and you're not a man, woman, whatever concepts that you identify with in the matrix. You shed those concepts when you go to sleep, and so that is your astral self. So you can think of the astral self as the moon. So I would be the sun, but my astral self would be the moon. And so there's a major, discrepancy between my ego and my astral self. My astral self is very, what's the word? Very filthy and debased. Very filthy, very debased, very evil. And it's funny, it's funny to talk about myself in such an objective way because, typically, as an ego, you don't really want to admit that there's another aspect of you that is really devolved. But this part of me is extremely devolved and starved of love. And so you say to yourself, well, how does that come to be, if you will? But when you are in an environment of restriction, it causes you to be angry. It causes your soul to get angry at that other aspect of you. So, what does that mean? If you're in a restrictive environment, like one of my chapters, I talked about Eden and being in a restrictive environment. Think of a kid. Because when we think of this aspect of us that is angry in the astral realm, or this aspect of me that's angry in the astral realm, I think about the id. And when you think about the id is like a conglomeration of unmanifested desires and tendencies. Freud calls it the id. New Age literature calls it the New Age literature calls it the inner child. And so think about a parent, if you will. There's a parent who brings their kid into a room, and the parent is like, well, you know, I have all these toys and things like that, and treats and goodies and what have you, but you can't play with everything. You can't eat anything you want. Think about Willy Wonka. Like, think about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and how, you know, Gene Wilder, you know, if he told the kids they couldn't actually do, you know, play with any of the things that they wanted to there. They could play with some of them, but not everything. Or maybe just a small fraction of what was there. So whenever you do that to a kid, you cause what I would call, you know, just some frustration. It's frustration. And so this unconscious aspect of a human being is an angry kid, is a beast. The Book of Revelation calls it the beast. And so, and when you don't have access to, I guess, Eden, if you will, you don't have access to the desires of your heart, then this aspect of you poisons the ego, so to speak, and it comes out in very menacing and disgusting ways at the end of the incarnation. And so that is how, you know, we get such a debased and devolved astral self. And so, you know, I talk about in this chapter, you know, the difference between the two, and how the earthly is suppressed so much to cause a, that causes this devolved and debased state of mind, if you will, on the fourth dimension, as they call it. When I was growing up, there was a band that I used to listen to a lot. It's called U2, and I know many of you are familiar with U2. And so, you know, I'm an 80s baby, so, you know, I love, you know, I grew up listening to U2 and Madonna, and, you know, just Guns N' Roses and Metallica, all these different artists of the 80s, and AHA and people like that. So, you know, when my pineal gland opened, I really started to backtrack and to look at all of the things that I was exposed to as a kid, because before the age of 7, you're in a beta brainwave frequency, and so that's a very highly suggestive frequency where the mind is really being shaped and molded. And so when I was, you know, actually the album that I'm talking about was after my age of 7, but, you know, I was just going back to different bands I used to listen to. And so when I looked at U2's album, it's called Achtung Baby. When I looked at Achtung Baby, I noticed that, you know, a song on there was called Mysterious Ways. And I really, you know, looked, when I examined and I had insight into the lyrics and into the actual video of that song, it blew me away, because it's one of the most satanic things I've ever seen in my life. Even the whole album itself, and the cover of the album is very satanic. So, you know, there's a conglomeration of different pictures on the front of the album. You see there's a picture of a scythe. You know, when you think of the scythe, you think of the Grim Reaper, or a reaper. That's Satanism, reaping the soul. There's another picture of stars. Stars are associated with Satanism. And, you know, people don't typically think of this, but we see stars everywhere in the demiurge matrix. Stars are, like, if you think of education, you will see stars. Teachers give their kids stars if they do well. Or say if you're going to the movies and you want to, you know, determine if the movie's really good or not, and see the ratings for like a movie or a restaurant you might want to go to, you look at the stars. Even in the governmental structure, you know, most flags have stars on them. And so the reason for this is because the star is like, it represents the 5-pointed star, or the pentagram, which is also associated with the Jews, which is the Star of David. So, and the pentagram, which is also associated with witchcraft, correlates to the 5 senses. It correlates to the reptilian brain, you know, sight, taste, touch, smelling, hearing. And so that's also Satanism as well. And also, too, when it comes to stars, stars is associated with the moon. It's associated with the unconscious mind because stars can only shine at night. Stars cannot shine in the light. So whenever the consciousness is waking up, stars get really scared. And so that's why when I started waking up, people around me really would not respond well to my frequency because me walking into a room is like a bright light. It's like the movie Gremlins, bright light, it's like, oh no, we got to get out of here. Around her, she knows the truth, type of thing. And so, people did not respond to me in a very welcoming way. It's kind of like they felt exposed, if you will, by my presence. So, but that just comes along with the territory of waking up. And so, but the moon, is associated with the star, with the unconscious mind, with, the phantoms of the mind and the desires of the heart. And, the moon is really an artificial construct, and when scientists actually did excavations on the moon and they looked at the sediments there, they found out that they weren't pure to the elements of the periodic table, that there were elements fused together. So it's an artificial construct. So when we think of the moon, we can think of the unconscious and how the unconscious is artificially created by the restrictions in the environment. So if I'm in Eden and I want a nice car and I can't have that car, then there's an angry kid in my head that's like, I want that car, and I want that car now. That's my car. I thought that car up in my dream, and so as a result, I should be able to ground that, having that car in physical reality. But without the sacral, without the masculine aspect to have the money or the time to make the money or whatever it is to ground those wishes, you can't have the car, and so the kid gets angry. And so, and also too, I want to point out that this is something that our consciousness automatically does. You just, from a little kid, you're just used to people telling you no. They're like, you can't have this, you can't have that. And so your consciousness automatically just puts things in a I guess you would call it like a garbage can. Like, think of your unconscious, think of the celestial body of the moon as like a waste dump. That's why it talks about the end of the world is when the moon turns red as blood. Basically, the end of the mind, the end of the world happens when the moon can't take any more, I guess what you would call waste from the ego. It's like, listen, I'm tired of not being able to ground my desires and, to have all of these thoughts, if you will, from the ego that isn't able to be expressed. And so it just, it actually, draws up a new game, if you will, or a new existence, because it can't hold on to any more stuff, if you will. So I talk about, in the particular video called Mysterious Ways, how that video is like an homage to the checkerboard floor of Freemasonry. And so I talk a lot about Freemasonry in my book. In fact, my handler in the astral realm is King James of Scotland, and so he's affiliated with the Freemasons. And so the Freemasons are creators of our reality, and their the whole doctrine is based upon duality. That's why when you think about Freemasons, you see oftentimes they have a checkerboard floor. Like Freemason lodges always have the checkerboard floor, and so black represents the masculine, whereas white represents the feminine. And so in the video for Mysterious Ways, it's in the Middle East. I want to say it's taking place in the Middle East, and so we see two types of women in the video. One of the women is dressed in burqas, and so we know the burqa is associated with with subjugating the female principle, making sure that there's nothing sexual that's associated with the woman, making sure she's covered up, and she can't really show her hair or show any aspect of her body, because that sexuality and the sexuality of the woman has to be suppressed. But then there's another picture of a woman dancing in front of the moon, and so that woman is she represents the suppressed earthly aspect or the sacral aspect of the women in burqas. So the women in burqas are severely suppressed in their physical. They have their burqas on, they can't show their hair, their body, what have you. But this unconscious aspect of them is that woman dancing in front of the moon. And so, and that's why they have the woman in front of the moon, because they're trying to tell you in an indirect way, this is the unconscious mind of the woman. This is the masculine, sacral, earthly aspect that's been taken out of the women dressed in burqas. And so this is how they exist on the unconscious or the astral realm. And it was genius to actually put the woman dancing in front of the moon as a belly dancer, because the sacral chakra is associated with the belly, with the genitals, and so the genitals represent the creative aspect of a human being, and the earthly aspect that grounds desires into reality. And so when I saw this video, I was just flabbergasted. I was just like, oh my gosh, like, this shows as a perfect example to show the difference between the astral self and the ego, the feminine and the masculine, and how the powers that be suppress using the metaphysical weapons of religion by putting these women in burqas and then creating this monster unconscious aspect that is super sexual and super sexually deviant, if you will. Like in one part in the video, it talks about Bono is saying, she's slippery, she's sliding down, she'll be there when you hit the ground. So basically, it's like the consciousness eventually devolves back to its unconscious state and hits the ground and meets its higher self in a very devolved way. And so, when I think about the feminine aspect of a soul, I think about Jesus. And sometimes when you see depictions of Jesus and his crucifixion, you see him hanging on the cross between two Marys. And one of the Marys is his mom, and the other one is Mary Magdalene. And I know that, in biblical texts, they don't disclose Mary Magdalene as being his wife, but, why else would she be there at the crucifixion? Clearly she's close to the family. She's his twin flame, his lover, his companion, what have you. And we know that in biblical text that he cast 7 devils out of Mary Magdalene. And so when we see depictions of Jesus hanging between his mother and his lover, we see that his earthly nature has devolved into filth. His mother represents purity and innocence, so this is the alpha. But then we have the omega, which is the end, which is death, if you will. And so we see that his nature has crucified him. His nature has gone from something innocent, which is what we think of Christmas, to something filthy, which is what we think of Saturnalia, which is a Roman pagan holiday that actually, is all about debauchery and the devolving nature, how nature devolves, if you will, into filth, and it's associated with the material or Saturn. So, looking at that video, and also too, another thing I want to talk about is brain frequencies, because when we're in an unconscious state of mind, we're in a beta brainwave frequency. When you look at that brainwave frequency, it's very chaotic. And so when you look at the video for Mysterious Ways, it's very chaotic. You can barely watch it without getting vertigo. Everything's jumping around really quickly, and so this signifies that the brain is overactive. And so the demiurge really encourages an overactive mind, a highly thinking, highly psychological mind. And so when we see that, it really definitely hits home to say, man, by splitting the consciousness and suppressing the earthly, so you can have a devil or a demon within the astral, is done by using a beta brainwave frequency and preventing the consciousness from going beyond beta to a more meditative state, which is like your alpha and your theta, definitely. So, pretty much that's what I, focus on in this particular chapter. This chapter is, it's just about the astral self, and it's about, just pretty much looking at the differences between your astral and your ego, and how the matrix creates the separation between the astral and the ego. The next chapter of the book is called The Beast. It's called The Beast. And, so this kind of coincides a lot with Penny when we talk about wholeness and oneness within the universe. And, when we think about the beast, we think about the book of Revelation and the mark of the beast. And so the beast is just a cluster of desire, if you will. It's just a cluster of desire. And so I go into more depth about how the beast is actually created. Like I said before, in depictions of Jesus, he's hanging between two Marys, his mother, which is innocence, and then his lover, which is filthy. That's why he cast the 7 devils out of her. So it is our nature that's used against us to force us out of our inheritance and our physical vessel, because that sacral aspect is taken out of us and rotted out of us, and causes us to dissociate. And when we dissociate and we're not in connection with our true selves, then we start to gain personalities and things like that. I talk about in my book, especially in future chapters in my book, how the mind encompasses everything. If I took something, I flashed it in front of you and you couldn't see it, consciously you could not see it, but if you were put into a meditative state, you could see what I showed you. And so whatever you love or value in the physical is something that you hate in the astral. So, this goes into duality. In New Age literature, you often hear about duality. But, when it comes to duality, just know that whatever you are in your physical, you are the opposite of that in your astral. So whatever you love in the physical, you hate in the astral. And so, like, for example, I give tons of examples about the dissociative aspects of my personality, but one of the things that I pride myself on in this reality, one of my roles is being a mom. Definitely the matrix teaches you how to sacrifice. You sacrifice yourself for your children to make sure that they have a good life. And so that was definitely a role that after a while I took a lot of pride in. But because I really love my daughter in this physical reality, the astral aspect of me hates her. And so when I was going through crucifixion, I would have like certain, thoughts about, something happening to her. So I would always, when she was with my ex-husband, I would always call and say, is she all right? What's going on? Because I would, always have thoughts like she was going to choke on something or something like that. Like I always was fed that information. My ex-husband would even call me sometimes and say, Lark is putting things in her mouth and, I don't want her to choke on things. It was just very interesting to find out that this astral aspect of me wanted my daughter dead. So me as an ego, I really loved her, but me as an astral aspect knew that she would be something used to keep me bound to the earth reality. Because whenever we're ascending out of a mind and body, we can't really have any attachments. And so, it is all about the astral wants to be free of the physical realm, if you will. And so it doesn't want to be bound by anyone or anything. So that I thought that was interesting, to discover that the mind is everything. It is, if you love something, you hate something. If you hate something, you love something. That's just the dual nature of it. And so that's very difficult for an ego to really come to grips with, because there are so many things in the physical reality that we love, and so to find out that we hate those things is very hard to wrap your mind around. It's like when I think of just things that I detest, like for example, I taught school for over 13 years. And, I've always, loved children, and I've done everything. I spent my whole life dedicated to helping children. And so to find out that this astral aspect of me hates children, was really like, wow, really? Like, that, who hates children? And so it really caused me to judge myself, if you will. But I really had to come to an understanding that whatever I love, the astral hates. Whatever I hate, the astral loves. And so when it talks about how Jesus was nailed to the cross, that's really talking about how Jesus was nailed to his unconscious mind, how his nature had devolved, and how he had to bring the inner to the outer and the outer to the inner. So we are everything that we see, or in other words, well, we're not everything that we see per se, but the mind is everything that we see. So the mind is everything that we are as an ego, and everything that we see that's projected out onto the seeming world. And so until we actually understand that, we will suffer. And so it was very hard for me to come to grips with the beast and how, things that as an ego I would just judge as a part of myself. And, you would consider me, because I'm a super duper inflated feminine ego. So, I do a lot of judging, and in fact, my whole career is about judging. I judged my students and gave grades and things like that, judged their behavior. I grew up within the school system and education, and I was judged, and everything in the school system especially is about judging. And so, when you think about that, how, you're judged in the school system, and then, having a career where you judge other people, I'm a super judge, so to speak, from an egoic standpoint. And so that's hard to reconcile when you really come to discover that, this whole reality is not for you to judge anything. It's just for you to be able to experience yourself in a very fun and playful way, and how that has actually devolved into, pointing fingers and into suffering and so forth. So the next chapter is called The Beast. I will see you guys in my next video. Thanks.